pose the question, I just want to empathize with your plight, Stella, Kristen, Joseph, Gabriel, the plight of your family, and then obviously the plight of WikiLeaks. You know, free, fair flow of information. If we zoom out a little bit, and I'll keep this question brief, but if we zoom out a little bit and we kind of look at the way that information was distributed by WikiLeaks, and then some of the broader implications around the globe. So I'm coming from the perspective of a conservative and then also a realist, right? So I understand that states have a need to survive, and I see them as look at actors that look for opportunities to express their self-interest. So on that basis, one of the issues that I am trying to understand, and I hope that you guys can give me some context on this, but I don't see the benefit to providing information in a free and fair way, I guess you could say, in a way that destabilizes governments. And so I think one of the unintended consequences of WikiLeaks is that, you know, there's a lot of research that shows certain connections between WikiLeaks releasing documents on US interactions with governments in the Middle East and prompting the Tunisian uprising or the Dignity Revolution, which some would say is the beginning of the Arab Spring. So these documents coming out of WikiLeaks causing the beginning of the Arab Spring, and then also causing a number of Western populist style social movements, you know, like what is the big one that Occupy Wall Street? So my question is, like, what is WikiLeaks kind of accountability in distributing this information in a destabilizing way that I think we agree on a lot of things, but that I think created a reaction from governments where
Christopher, the truth should never be destabilizing. And
but it is though. We can look at
if the truth destabilizes, then it means the side that is being destabilized is acting not in the interest of the people. If the truth is destabilizing a government, then it is not acting in the interest of the people. And if WikiLeaks is exposing that, then good on them.
But what are the interests of...
I do agree with that. If we cannot handle the truth, we cannot handle democracy. That is the essence of democracy, is to have truthful information to enlighten the individuals in society to make an informed decision. So what are you saying? That we should suppress the truth? And if we do that, we can just kiss democracy goodbye in our world.
But some of the governments that reacted to the publication of WikiLeaks were not democratic by any means. So especially in the
if you're referring to the Ben Ali government in Tunisia, who packed up in a private jet and fled to Saudi Arabia and have been there ever since, and what took over from that dictatorship? Democracy.
Can I just really quickly, in between here, encourage people to go retweet Stella's fresh, brand new tweet. If anyone in here could do that, everyone in here should do that. Please show support, retweet it, like it, get it everywhere. And Stella, should we be hashtagging, or anyone who has an opinion on this, free Julian or free Assange?
Never use hashtags. Just never use hashtags. They don't work.
Well, one hashtag is fine. I'm just trying to find the one that we should use. And one would actually be good to keep it in the algos.
I think you just type WikiLeaks. That should be enough. Like, don't actually use hashtags.
If everyone can just retweet that tweet, that would be amazing. I pinned it up at the top. Let's spread it everywhere.
So I want to, before going to Dallas and Brian, I want to go back to the question, Stella and Kristen, that Kim answered. Get your thoughts on it as well, because I'm still surprised by the reaction of the press to the story. So Kim gave a good answer on this. Would love your take on it. Like, this is journalists should be the first to fight for the cause, and we have that propaganda, as you mentioned, Kristen, against Julian, against WikiLeaks and what happened. That I've just been seeing everywhere as I try to look at both sides of the story.
Well, I
Right.
think it's fairly obvious that the propaganda did work. And just look at the facts. It's only now a couple of weeks ago that the primary media partners who were complicit in the in the act of journalism, which now Julian has been hunted for 12 years, who actually stood out and said, no, we are against his extradition, we're against him being charged, drop the charges. It took them all these years, the decade, to come to the conclusion that this was
Why?
against their interest. Well, you should ask them. I don't want to speculate on their motives, but Kim was probably pretty close to the essence of it. But enough is enough, and there was talk about zooming out. I would really want people to zoom out of partisan positions when it comes to Julian, and especially Americans, and I have a lot of friends in the United States. You need to step out of the partisan position and stop taking the lead from the party machines and just look at the whole picture here. What is really going on here? What is the reality that we now are seeing, and it's emerging and it's growing? We have Australia, we have Latin America, we have Europe, we have 3 continents basically saying enough is enough. If Biden administration and Attorney General Garland do not see the light and to stop this immediately, it means that there are underlying sinister forces which are driving this case. And you can call it the deep state, we could call it the rogue law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies. We could call it the CIA just going rogue, as they did in 2017 and have done before and will do it again. And we see now the FBI, how they operate in the Twitter files. Now, that is something that is causing concerns all over the world, and it needs to stop. So Julian's case is a test case of such a big underlying values that are at stake here that people need to rally to that cause. It is about press freedom. It is about civilization. So it needs to stop here and now. If not, it is absolutely the dark ages again. It is worse than the Nixon 70s. And you can ask Daniel Ellsberg, the leaker of the Pentagon Papers, about that position, who has claimed that if he had been fighting his case in the early 70s under the current regime, he would have never seen a day of freedom in his life. He was able to win his case because there were still legal avenues to fight. There was still support in the press who took on the fights, like the New York Times in the test case, in the Pentagon paper case. This is not here anymore. And now the public needs to take the lead on this. And it's not about whether you're a Democrat or you're a Republican. It's about whether you believe in the rule of law, international law. For example, the extradition request from the Americans to the United Kingdom is a violation of the bilateral treaty between the UK and the USA. It is an attack on the First Amendment in the United States. And if you're a liberal American, don't take the leads from the Democratic Party backrooms on what you feel about Julian Assange. 2016 has nothing to do with the indictment against Julian. And actually, 2016 and the DNC leak is an absolutely a case where you should reconsider, and you should take the lead from Judge Coeltl of the U.S. District Court in New York, who threw out a case from the Democratic Party against Julian. And may I quote the reason why they dismissed the case? I quote, "The DNC's published international communications allowed the American electorate to look behind the curtains of one of the 2 major political parties in the United States during a presidential election. This type of information is plainly of the type entitled to the strongest protection of the First Amendment offers," unquote. This is the reality. This was journalism, just like 2010, 2011 publication was journalism at its best. It needs a protection. Otherwise, we can just turn the lights off and say goodbye to our freedoms.
Well, in a nutshell, what this case is about is, should the truth be free or should the truth be criminalized? Should the person that tells truth about crimes end up in jail, or should those who have committed the crimes end up in jail? So if you are for truth, you need to stand up for Julian Assange.
Catherine?
Yeah, I wonder if there are any times where, there are times where secrecy is important. So, but I, in my view, but I do also think that, real journalist in general. Like, can anybody who calls themselves a journalist be considered a journalist? Does it have to be an established publication? I just wanted to get your sense on that, your thoughts on that.
Well, Julian has never been of the opinion that nothing should be secret. He's often said, for example, if there was a sting operation, publishing everything in advance of that operation would affect it, and it wouldn't be something that we would do. However, what we had found is that classification had been extended for far longer than it should have been. And so lots of the publications that we've done were of classified material that should have been declassified by that stage. And also dealing with what you say about he's not a journalist, that is a way to go after Julian and separate him from the journalist, so in an attempt to prosecute him, because it goes back to the Obama administration's view that they had what they called the New York Times problem of, we can't go after Julian and WikiLeaks without going after the New York Times. They publish the same thing at the same time on the same websites. And WikiLeaks doesn't only provide the information and do so in concert with other media organizations. We do also put out articles and editorials on our publications. Kristen or Stella, if you want to add more onto that.
Yeah, whether he's a journalist or not. First of all, Julian's journalist unions, where he has, in Australia, where he's from, he's been a member of his union for since 2008, I think. He's recognized as a journalist by the International Federation of Journalists. It should be up to journalists, associations, and so on to determine whether you're a journalist or not. This is just how I see it, is a way of not dealing with the issue at hand. The case itself makes journalistic activity, news gathering, a crime. It doesn't say if you're a journalist, you're safe. If you're not a journalist, you're not. It is the activity that defines the crime, and the activity that is being described is news gathering.
And is the activity something that, how do you sort of determine when that information is no longer, say, a threat and is in the public good, as opposed to potentially still having some valid reasoning behind being classified? Like, should that be at the hands of the journalist, or there should be some sort of or an organization of journalists sort of just determines the ethics of it? Like, what is the best way to determine these sort of things? And just for the record, I certainly do see WikiLeaks and Assange as a journalistic organization.
Well, you're asking a big question about these lines, but this is a question that every journalist has to answer in itself, and any editorial organization has to answer these questions. There is always ethical questions being considered, and certainly WikiLeaks is no different from any other journalistic organization when it comes to that. But who is a journalist? Well, of course, Julian is a journalist. He's been a holding member of his union, Journalist Union Australia, since 2006 or 7, I think, and is still a member. He is acknowledged as a journalist by journalist organizations all around the world, and by the International Federation of Journalists. So there is no question about it. He is a recipient of the highest journalistic prize in his home country, Australia, the Walkley Award, which is like the Pulitzer of Australia. And WikiLeaks and Julian have accumulated, I think, now close to 24 of, if not 30 or 30 something, journalistic awards all around the world for the publications. So there's no question about the journalistic aspect of it, and simply by allowing the Pentagon or the Department of Justice to define who is a journalist and who is not poses a grave problem just in itself. Do you want an agency of your government to take that responsibility to decide who is a journalist and who is not? That is basically saying they can decide what is a story and what is not a story. That's just incomprehensible and it should of course never happen in a world where we have press freedom.
Or a foreign government.
Catherine,
When you have a foreign government saying, "Oh well, I don't know, that New York Times journalist is not a journalist according to our government," so that's fine.
It's a terrible
United
precedent,
States,
right?
sorry.
It sets a terrible precedent, when the U.S. government says that Julian Assange is not a real journalist. It allows other governments, especially ones that are hostile to journalists, to say, "Hey, if you can decide that, we can do the same thing. We can classify these journalists as, non-state actors who are hostile to us, and allow them to take action against it." And the United States, if anything, should be setting a precedent to allow journalists to have press freedoms, right? I mean, that's guaranteed in the First Amendment. So by going against their own First Amendment, they're actually making it difficult for journalists worldwide, right?
Exactly.
They've already done that.
Reckless. It's reckless towards third parties all over the world, that they're running this argument. And I mean, in effect, the U.S. wants to be the editor-in-chief of the world, and enforce its Espionage Act against foreigners anywhere and domestic, if it doesn't like what it reads.
Yeah, Catherine made a tweet about a year ago where she quoted someone saying, "Assange committed empire's greatest sin. He exposed it as a criminal enterprise. He documented its lies, callous disregard for human life, rampant corruption, and innumerable war crimes. Republican or Democrat, it does not matter." That's really what it boils down to.
And well, the sorry thing is, of course, that the Assange precedent has already had a negative effect. Stella mentioned earlier the reply by the president of Azerbaijan, who snaps back at a BBC reporter saying, "How dare you to criticize lack of press freedom in my country when you are imprisoning Julian Assange in London?" You have similar quotes from the Russian authorities and the Chinese authorities. This is already having an effect. It sets an example. And we saw in Australia, for example, that I believe because of the Assange case, that the editorial offices of the ABC National Broadcasting News Organization were raided in an attempt to find and locate a source. Now, this needs to end. We need to stop this.
That's ABC Australia.
ABC Australia. This needs to end. This is just too dangerous to continue. It has already had a negative effect, and I could easily claim that there is a possibility that because of the Assange persecution and the precedent that is set, the American government might already have blood of innocent journalists on their hands somewhere out there in the world.
We see it in Ukraine, right? They are, putting out arrest warrants, even Interpol red notices on journalists who are living in other countries, in Spain, in the Philippines, even. And it seems to have gotten a rubber stamp from the Biden administration. They can pretty much do anything they want. Anyone who is hostile to the Ukrainian regime, right? Whatever you think of the war, regardless, right? Journalists should be allowed to report about what's happening on both sides, whether it's in the Donbass or whether it's in Kiev. We see them, getting cracked down on, going to jail for reporting on anything that is, negative to the Zelensky regime. And I'm sure Kim would like to say a few things about this.
Well, I mean, there is this famous kill list that the Ukraine government supports, where people who speak out against the war in Ukraine are suddenly on that list. They even put Elon Musk on that list for half a day or something until they removed it because the reaction was too strong. But see, that's the problem. When they can get away with this kind of persecution against Julian Assange, who's going to stand up for all the other journalists, right? They are all in more danger because of the case against Julian Assange.
Brian, gonna give us a final question?
Yeah. I think it's clear that the release of information via WikiLeaks should and likely is protected by laws in the US. But what's the line that WikiLeaks draws when it comes to possibly aiding in the hacking of material or helping a leaker cover their own tracks after they hack something or get it illegally?
And just give more context for the audience. So that was one of the charges against Julian, that he tried to help. I forgot the hacker's name, the one that changed his name or changed their name. Stella, no,
Chelsea
sorry,
Manning.
Stella.
Chelsea Manning.
Chelsea Manning, but he wasn't a hacker.
Yeah, so Chelsea worked. I'll let you explain it. I think you'll do a better job at explaining it. I think it was you, Kristen, or Stella.
Kristen, do you?
I think you're alluding to one of the 18 counts, which is
correct. A pretty minor one at that, just to be clear.
Yeah, it's a pretty minor one, yes, but it's a very worrying one because it is in essence criminalizing a very normal journalistic source relationship. It is such a shallow in its elements that it has been totally refuted in the courtrooms in London by actually former Pentagon or computer experts that there's no substance in this allegation of a conspiracy to commit computer intrusion. I think it's called legally. It is simply a very normal practice to protect a source, and you are obliged to do so as a journalist. And what is being alleged here is basically that Julian helped in protecting a source. But it is not even that, because if you look very closely at the so-called hacking charge, which is the 18th count, you call it minor, well, it's maximum 5 years imprisonment. It is simply not allegation of any hacking at all. There is no hacking involved. If you read the text, there is nothing about hacking in there, neither by the alleged source nor by the journalist. So despite that, it is constantly being called the hacking charge. And even in the press release from the Department of Justice, it's called a hacking charge. It is not. And it's part of this is endless propaganda that we have to deal with, and we're trying to unwind by actually educating people on venues like this and others. But people just need to read into the details. And there is nothing in what is alleged that is outside the normal framework of a relationship between a journalist and his source, which needs to be protected. And that is something that every journalist who needs routinely to be in relationship with sources, who needs protection, should be alarmed about this charge, because it endangers a normal standard practice of journalism.
Yeah, so like my question, like just away from that charge, like just in general, like what would WikiLeaks, where would you draw the line? Like if somebody came to you and said, "Hey, I need help doing this," would you guys give that help if it was illegal?
You don't engage in illegal activity as a journalist. That's bottom line.
Yeah, it's not.
But
It's like
Brian,
the journalist isn't committing a crime when they're publishing a story that was given to them by someone who may or may not have procured it illegally. Otherwise, I mean, you can press charges against a whistleblower if you're the government, right? But you shouldn't be going after journalists. Actually, you can't, because that's the New York Times problem, where you can't be jailing journalists just because their sources happen to break confidentiality. That's not their purview, right? A journalist's job is to publish what is given to them.
And that's the Trojan
It is
horse.
a
Just a
well-recognized
second.
practice all over the world, and especially the United States, that journalists have the right to publish material which is in the public interest, irrespective of whether it was illegally obtained in the first place by the source. It doesn't really matter. Don't care if it's in the
Absolutely.
public interest. It goes through the routine evaluation of what journalists do. Is it truthful? Is it accurate? Is it in the public interest? If so, publish it. You have the right to do so.
the
Yeah, so
European
For
Union.
instance, like when
just to add on that
Mhm.
real quick, this is a Trojan horse that was put into the indictment by the U.S. government because they know if journalists receive information from whistleblowers or anyone who has not had authorized access to that information, so went beyond their security clearance to get more information, they are trying to use this charge to tell journalists, if you work with that material, just like Assange, you're committing a crime, and you can go to jail. That's why they try to extradite him and get a conviction on this, because they will then use that against all journalists who receive information from their sources, saying you have aided and abetted them in doing something illegal. And that's outrageous. Like, everyone should
it
be
is,
really understanding what they're trying to do here.
and
Also, the
journalists, the fact
European
that
Union's guidelines on whistleblower protection do state that the motivation or the means by which a whistleblower procures their information is irrelevant to the journalist that publishes it. So long as the journalist is a passive recipient, which WikiLeaks is,
Well, it doesn't
it's
have to be
fine.
passive, right? I mean, if look what's happening with the Twitter files. I mean, people are
that is,
saying, if you have information about um about what the FBI was doing beyond what's already been published, then submit it to a journalist. Is that a crime to say that?
no, it's not. Shouldn't be.
The solicitation it's been in reality, journalists solicit all the time, publicly and privately, all the time. They cultivate sources. They ask them if they can help them confirm some information or supply a document that evidences some wrongdoing. I mean, this is what journalists do, and it might be worth maybe clarifying on this whole computer fraud and abuse act charge. Manning had, this is the source, Chelsea Manning had top security clearance. None of the information that she supplied was top security. She didn't have to she didn't enter into any database that she didn't already have access to. Julian didn't have to help her do anything because she already had access to that and higher classification. And the US's allegation in relation to this computer charge, this is the US's argument, is that there was a conspiracy to try to. Now it gets kind of technical, but a conspiracy to try to crack a computer hash to a password that would have allowed her to access the same information from a different account that would have anonymized her, if you can follow that. It's a construction of a charge, because what happened in the extradition hearing was that a technical expert that Kristen was referring to, who used to be the top forensics guy in the Pentagon, computer forensics guy, said this charge makes no sense technically. It is a technical impossibility that this was the purpose of this conversation, because a conversation that they can't even that is between two anonymous accounts on a chat doesn't say help me crack this password so that I can log in with a different username. It doesn't say that, and they've kind of constructed this charge out of nothing. So even the US's allegation is total bullshit, and they just inserted it because they needed some kind of so-called hacking element to try to make Julian seem like a criminal, right? To say like, oh, there's some kind of computer hacking element, but it doesn't. It holds no water whatsoever, and the U.S. has a strong jurisprudence on the fact that journalists are allowed to receive information that was obtained illegally by the source.
Just to add to that, I mean, at Rebel News, when the Freedom Convoy protests were happening, there was a case where the RCMP trampled on protesters, one of whom was very, very injured, right? She was a indigenous woman who participated in the protest very peacefully, and she was trampled by a horse. Now, Rebel News actually received DMs from a WhatsApp group by these police officers who were responsible for this, and they were laughing at it. And we published the conversation unredacted, right, along with their names and everything, because that was provided to us. Now, you could argue that the police officer may have violated his code of conduct or whatever by leaking the conversation with his fellow officers to us. But the fact remains is that, you know, we didn't get in trouble for it, and that's good, you know, like, but imagine, if you will, if the Canadian government tried to suppress it, or if the RCMP tried to suppress it because we published a piece of news, a very, you know, very a damning piece of news that was of the public interest, that made them look bad, that made their organization look extremely bad, right? So this is the worry that I think every journalist should have, is that if they go after Julian Assange, and they are going after him, and they're trying to, you know, say that he's not a journalist, that he's publishing illegal things, then what's to stop the government in the future from doing the exact same thing to any of us journalists who are covering the truth? And yeah, we often get, you know, our sources are going to be from the inside, who may or may not be breaking their own rules, but we should not be prosecuted for it, because that would be insane. It's absolutely in the public interest to know these things. So I'm personally, I mean, I'm going on a diatribe here, but I'm personally quite offended by the fact that some journalists are actually not on Julian Assange's side, right? Like, they're questioning his merits as a journalist, questioning whether he even has the right to publish any of these things. Of course he does. Because if he doesn't have those rights, then neither do any of us. No one who is a journalist, who is a self-respecting journalist, would have those rights. And that's
But
why it's such a huge concern.
I'm glad that the question was raised, Ian, because it was answered perfectly, and anyone who has listened to this panel today has heard why Julian Assange is a journalist. So it's good that it came up.
Absolutely, this conversation is necessary.
I'd like to.
I think it's worth adding here that you know, it. Look at the environment in Washington D.C., where leaks occur daily. It is part of the bread and butter of journalists in the Capitol in the United States, and it's unauthorized leak. And it's, of course, there are motives involved that might be sinister, but every day journalists are getting leaks and publishing information based on leaks which are unauthorized, and probably in many cases in violation of laws or security principles. So I mean, if we're going to take that principle that they are trying to frame Julian on and apply it in Washington D.C., I mean, the courtrooms will be full of journalists. who would be putting in jail because they published leaked information. So it's absurd, and it's something that needs to end.
Well, my
Kristen, and most of
understanding,
these leaks are actually from government sources because they want to do
Exactly.
something against the opposing party. So, you have these intelligence community members that are leaking private conversations of politicians because they don't agree with what these politicians are trying to do. And so it's okay for them to leak information or their goals to undermine an opponent. But when it's against the government, then of course it's terrible.
well, my
Absolutely.
understanding is that also with Obama, he had expressed that previously that he was a little bit more reluctant to push for some of the, like 175-year punishment for Assange because of what, the chilling effect it would have on journalism. And then it seems like things have accelerated, and also what I was seeing in the beginning of this prosecution was, or this case, was that the journalists were very much on his side, on Assange's side, and then now there's just this kind of almost lack of interest. And so I'm kind of curious as to why, are they able to go harder after him because of this lack of interest, or is the lack of interest tied into that?
Well, it's clear to me that if the mainstream media had done its job, and actually looked at this case, well, at Julian's persecution, which is now clear that it is a political persecution, but should have been clear to journalists along the way, especially those who partnered with Julian. If they had reported uh, well, as in not taken a surface reporting approach to, for example, the extradition, the original, like when he was first arrested, and then Sweden trying to extradite him and refusing to question him for years and years and years. Like, if they had taken a more in, interrogated the situation a little bit more, which was what they should have been doing, and reported fairly on Julian, he would not have spent a single day in prison. What happened was that there was a concerted attack on his reputation, and the press, for their own reasons, because WikiLeaks was a newcomer in 2010 and got the greatest journalistic scoop in journalistic history. And Julian did things differently, and he introduced encryption technology to protect sources, and so got very high quality um, uh, leaks. And Julian was also a critic towards the mainstream media. He criticized them when they reported in a way that on the WikiLeaks material, for example, that wasn't accurate or truthful. And because he and WikiLeaks have such a pristine reputation in terms of the truth record, WikiLeaks has never had to retract anything. It's 100% accuracy, which is unparalleled. The New York Times can't claim such a thing, or the Guardian, because WikiLeaks and Julian were such heavy hitters, but were outsiders. Then the press ganged up on him, and once they had all the Chelsea Manning leaks, they turned on him. Simple as that. And then they also did basically they assumed that if the U.S. government went after Julian, they'd find a way to do it that didn't affect them, and they were wrong. So now they've finally realized that the U.S. government went after Julian as a journalist, not as a whistleblower, but for publishing activities, for news gathering, and then they've come round. But it's not nearly where it should be. And I mean, it got so bad that even The Guardian published, not even The Guardian, The Guardian was one of the worst. But they've changed. But until Julian's arrest, they were publishing outright fabrications. There was a complete fabrication that was published on the front page of The Guardian in November 2018, that Paul Manafort had met Julian on 3 occasions inside the embassy. A complete invention, not true. I mean, even now they basically they haven't. The story is still online, but it's kind of been massaged. So it's kind of, sources say Manafort visited, so that's not even a news story. But the fact that they actually published this complete fabrication on their front page shows how the standards just plummeted when it came to Julian, and it was this plummeting of standards that was there to reduce his political capital, and that was in parallel with that was part of the CIA's broad-ranging operation to take down WikiLeaks, to plant stories in the media, to brief journalists negatively with falsehoods, to attack him, so that when he was arrested, he would have to start with in a very difficult position. But if they had done their jobs, Julian would never have been in prison. I'm convinced of this. And every day that Julian spends in prison is the press failing to do their job in getting him out, because it is their responsibility and it is their self-interest that is at stake.
Silver, do you want to go with the last question? Go ahead, Kim.
Just real quick, there's over 7,000 people in this room right now. Mario made a tweet 2 hours ago about this space that you are listening to. Please do me a favor, retweet that, because after we are done here, a recording of this space will become available and everyone should listen to this. I also just made a tweet about it as well. So if you want to retweet that, that's fine. But I think it's important, if you are wondering how you can help Julian, this is an easy way to do it, because the more people hear the story and hear the facts and hear the truth, can get behind him and demand his release from prison and for these charges to be dropped. So that's an easy way how you can engage and help out. Just spread the news about this room and ask everyone to listen to this recording.
Hey, Kim.
Go ahead. So Silver and Michael. Michael, I know you're waiting to share a story as well. Go ahead, Silver.
I apologize for being late. I missed most of this, but I honestly believe I've been following this story for years, and I apologize if this question has already been asked. The public seems to, I don't know the polling numbers, but the public seems to favor Julian's position so much that I find it hard to believe that the government could ever get a conviction on him. Is he considering, maybe, obviously he's not considering because he hasn't, but why not just come and face the charges? And I honestly believe he'd be found not guilty, and we would raise so much money on behalf of him for defense, for his legal defense, that he'd have the best lawyers in America defending it. And that's just my opinion. I think he would be found not guilty by a jury. Just my opinion.
Well, let me give you a little bit of
background
on that. So it's important to understand that, first of all, he is indicted and charged in the Eastern District of Virginia. That is where all the spy agencies are. You have 1 million people working for the intelligence community there. So you will end up with a tainted jury. The other thing is Julian cannot, under an Espionage Act charge, make a public interest defense. He could not, for example, argue that this information was in the public interest, that it is the truth, and that it helped expose, criminal activity by the government. And when you are so restricted in your defense, and you're basically in the National Security Court, where all the judges that have security clearances there are known to have a 99.9% conviction rate against anyone who's ever released any information about the government, when you know that the jury pool will be completely tainted with intelligence community people, and when you know that Julian doesn't have the right to defend a public interest case, well, then you cannot ask him to seriously consider coming to the United States and facing trial, because he will never have a fair trial.
On top of that, it's worth mentioning.
I wasn't
on top of that, it's worth
I was not
mentioning.
aware of that. But
On
thank
top
you
of
very
that,
much,
it's
Kim,
worth.
for clarifying that.
Let me mention also that it's likely that Julian would be in a pre-trial detention for maybe up to 3 years, and the condition of the detention is dictated by the CIA. The CIA could demand that he would put in solitary confinement, and that is basically putting his life in the hands of the agency, which we now know was plotting to kidnap or assassinate him. So it is just an impossibility. It's a threat to his life, and that is not just a medical assessment, but also the reality that we are dealing with, as I say, because of the pre-trial detention, on top of the arguments that Kim mentioned. He has no chance, 0 chance of a fair trial in the United States.
And it's absolutely ridiculous to suggest that Julian should be extradited to the country that planned to assassinate him, kidnap him, and assassinate him. That is unheard of. And I have to say that the judiciary in the United Kingdom is not doing itself any service at all for not considering that the most disqualifying feature of this whole extradition. There's now clear evidence that the US government was trying to kidnap and kill Assange. How can they send him to the country that wanted to do that to him? It's outrageous.
Michael, I know you wanted to share a final thing.
Absolutely.
Before we wrap up the space.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thank you to all the hosts and people here today, especially Stella and obviously Julian. I did a report called the Ericsson Report, A Matter of National Security. It's a report on a Swedish telecommunication inter-exchange company who in February of 2022, their CEO came out and admitted openly that they've been sponsoring, bribing, and funding ISIS for a period of over 17 years. I would not have been able to complete that report or even put it together if not for Julian and the WikiLeaks cables. And excuse me. So with that in mind, this is a Swedish telecommunications company, a foreign company that controls in America our 911 emergency services. So when you continue to further extract the reporting that I've done and see just how targeted I've been in terms of not being able to get this story out, the further and further I've dug, it leads all the way back to the 1996 Telecommunications Act, which takes all media and through the FCC as well through other organizations, and makes it a public-private partnership, one of such a size that it's literally them versus everyone else. So it's not most often that mainstream media doesn't want to cover the story. It's that their attorneys or their lawyers will not let them, because it's not in the best interest of their profit margin or their shareholders. Now, the precedent for that just gets so much worse after you look into the spying that was done on the executive office through a company called Newstar. They had a tech executive named Rodney Joffe, and so I don't want to get too technical with it, but
yeah, we're good just to keep it short.
Sure. it is very, very important that when people are wondering why things are going awry on Twitter or why certain things are not working the way they're supposed to be, it's because at the infrastructure level, they've infiltrated and controlled this apparatus, dating back to '84, but starting with the Telecommunications Act. And now that we have a company controlling our 911 emergency services, that also has admitted openly, their CEO has admitted, and they have come out and stated.
And the important thing is that Michael, you got this story from WikiLeaks as well, which I think is the highlight of.
Absolutely, and well,
everything.
okay. So November 28th of 2010, the United States diplomatic cables leak, known as Cablegate. December 1st, Amazon kicks WikiLeaks off of their servers due to pressure from the Department of Homeland Security. December 2nd, Interpol office in Gothenburg, Sweden, issues a fresh arrest warrant for WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. So then you also have, on December 1st, the United States Patent Office issue several letters to all the federal agencies, as well as the DIA, CIA, and others, stating, if you reveal these cables, or if you even look at them on your personal phones, we will fire you and we will sue you. So it has to stand to reason that this goes further than just a simple case of Julian revealing the truth. These cables actually are connected to Western Union. They reveal the SWIFT transactions and financial transactions. Go ahead.
I appreciate you sharing this, Michael. No, thanks for coming up and sharing this. Kim, any final words before I give the mic to Stella, Kristen, Joseph, and Gabriel?
Yeah, I mean, the final words that I have, first of all, to the courageous people like Stella, Gabriel, Kristen, Joseph, they're all working together to find justice for Julian, to protect us, frankly, from a future where truth is criminalized. And we owe them great gratitude for that. And I personally thank them for that. And everyone who's here, you have heard and learned today a lot of things about the case that you may not have known. And if that infuriates you, if you feel like what's happening here is so unjustified and so outrageous, then get involved, act, retweet, get to your politicians, talk to people about this case. Now there's a recording of the space, so ask your friends to listen to that. And fortunately now with new leadership at Twitter, I believe that the de-amplification of anything that had to do with Julian Assange and his case is now finally gone. So before, for many, many years, Twitter has acted as a filter against Julian Assange and has not really allowed these topics to have enough reach. That is different now. So you can now engage, talk about it on Twitter, and make sure that everyone understands what's going on in this case. Because, I have the same feeling like Stella. The pressure is mounting. There are so many human rights organizations, journalistic organizations, politicians, leaders of countries speaking out for Assange. There will come a point when the US government can no longer afford this persecution, when they are so exposed by doing this that it just becomes a threat to them. So the more amplification we give this topic, the better, and everyone should participate in that. That is the best thing you can do. If you can't donate, if you can't help Julian in any other way, just make sure that everyone hears about his story and that we all come together to fight for him.
Ian, final words before I give the mic to Stella, Joseph, Kristen, and Gabriel.
I think Kim really summed it up. I think this fight is more than, as Kristen mentioned earlier, this is not about partisan politics. This is not about left versus right, Democrats versus Republicans. I mean, this is about press freedom. This is about freedom of speech, period. And if you don't care about it, if you don't think it affects you, it will. If Assange loses this fight, that's it for press freedom. I mean, it's they're eroding it one bit at a time, and Julian Assange is in the way. It's as simple as that.
Joseph?
The UK judge ruled that an extradition for Julian would be enough to end his life. And we often hear about, especially us having just traveled through Latin America, dead journalists. We are in the unique position of being able to save a journalist for having done nothing other than his work in a dignified and good, accurate manner. So go and speak to your politicians, get them involved. We've got now we've got something like 18 cross-party parliamentary groups in 18 countries. This is a political case. It is politically motivated, and it needs a political solution. That's my...
Yeah, this is the most important case of our time. This is a test case of this century. More than 100 years ago, France had the Dreyfus affair, which is still being cited for its horrible malpractice and injustice. The Assange case is the Dreyfus affair of our times on a global scale, and it's a huge test case. And Joseph mentioned our travels to Latin America. We met a great understanding from these battered nations who have, in our history and our times, have to deal with dictatorship, military dictatorship, oppression, CIA wars, and political assassinations, and what have you, human rights abuses. Everybody in those countries understands the essence of the case, and the fact that this is about a man's life, which we need to save, as Joseph says, but also about such great principles, the greatest principles of our time. So I urge everybody to spread the word, like Kim said, and I really thanks everybody for listening in this room, and thereby understanding and acknowledging the great importance of this case.
Gabriel has dropped out, I think. Oh, Gabriel, you're there. Gabriel,
Yeah.
any final words before I give the mic to Stella?
Yeah, thank you, Mario, and your team. Thanks, Kim and Ian, for sharing this space. I think, it's been really great in spreading the awareness and people sharing, and I think it's going to do a lot for Julian's case. This is the press freedom, the free speech, the fight for truth case of our lifetime. And if you care about free speech and if you care about truth, join us and we can all win this together. So, yeah, get involved, follow us all on Twitter, retweet, donate, share the truthful information with your friends like this podcast. But yeah, just get involved.
Thanks, Gabriel. Stella, I'll give you the final word because I've got a lot to say afterwards. A lot of things here caught me by surprise. So I'll give you the final word, Stella. Last message for the audience and what they can do to help.
Thanks, Mario. And thanks, Ian, Kim, Brian, Catherine, and everyone else for tuning in. Maybe some practical things. One is, yes, follow me, follow Gabriel, follow Kristen, and Joseph. Sign up to the don'textraditeassange.com newsletter if you want to stay across the developments, because whenever there's a development in the extradition case, maybe you don't want to have so much detail, but if you do, there's a newsletter on don'textraditeassange.com, and you can also get see how to donate there. A request, which is not to group Julian automatically in with Snowden. They're two different cases, and it confuses things. Snowden is a whistleblower. Like Daniel Hale, like Chelsea Manning, it's a different case. The implications are different. Julian is being gone after as a publisher. The implications are for the press in the case against Julian. The whistleblower protections are important, but they're separate arguments. And I often see a lot of confusion. Sometimes Julian's referred to as a whistleblower, and it doesn't help because it confuses the my work in trying to explain the implications for the press and for freedom of speech, and for the publics to know the right to know the truth from publishers who are receiving information. And speak to your friends, your family. It's Christmas. Many of you in this room will be celebrating Christmas. Speak to your friends and your family members. Speak to your colleagues, people who aren't necessarily following things or exposed to it, or even are antagonistic. Challenge their assumptions. Tell them to listen to this space. There are 2 books you can read, which are very good. One is The Trial of Julian Assange. The Trials of Julian Assange, sorry, by Niels Meltzer. I'll do a tweet about the books. And the other one is Stefania Maurizzi. She's an Italian journalist that has basically done a lot of Freedom of Information Act work in the UK, in Sweden, and she's attempting to get information from the US. So far, they've just been giving her redacted documents, and Australia, but she's litigating in all 4 countries. And I think she might follow her on S Maurizzi. I'll also put in a tweet afterwards. But these books really dissect the legal and political persecution against Julian. One is by the first one is by the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture. So he's very, they carry a lot of authority. And Stefania's book has just won 3 major investigative journalism awards in Italy, and it's just been published in English. And just stay engaged. Don't make Julian a taboo subject. We have to make him a consensus mainstream cause célèbre. It is the fight of our times. And so many things are tied up with Julian's freedom.
I'll end it with the following as well. Like I did not expect a lot of the things that were mentioned here, like the lack of journalists supporting Julian's cause, or the misinformation that was spread. And I'm glad that you've kind of differentiated Julian's position from whistleblowers. I think this is a battle against something a lot bigger than WikiLeaks itself. And I've always empathized with journalists, especially outside the US and other countries where they don't have those protections, but I never expected to have those concerns in the West. So that did catch me by surprise, and I hope that there is more awareness brought to this. So we will be sharing this space with all the journalists in our network, as we usually do. And as there's more developments, Stella, Kristen, everyone else, Joseph, and Gabriel, do let us know. Happy to do more shows on this later on, bring other guests to kind of keep bringing awareness to this, bring more journalists as well, maybe some policymakers from Europe and from the US to discuss this. So Stella, definitely keep me posted of the developments with Julian. Really appreciate you coming in, and also massive respect as I was watching the videos of the documentaries on YouTube. Massive respect for what you've done. And
maybe we could get a president from South America to weigh in on this.
Yeah, actually, Joseph, that's a good idea. If we could do that, we're talking with a few policymakers and 2 presidents already to bring them into the space for different discussions. The closest we've had to a president coming here, obviously in the US, we've had Hunter Biden, son of a president, with a few senators, but we've never had a president. If there's anyone, because we've never had a purpose to bring one either. But I think in this case, if there is any president or anyone that you've spoken to that will be interested in coming and doing a space on freedom of press, and obviously focusing on the Julian Assange story, as something we're willing to do and prep in advance for it. So we're definitely open for that, Joseph.
I got half of that because the connection's a bit poor, but I think I got it. Message me.
Yeah, I'll message you. I'll message you on WhatsApp. All good. Otherwise, yeah, Kim, Ian, thanks a lot for helping organize this and for the team. And yeah, I hope the next space will be a more positive one, and we'll see something positive from the Biden administration.
News.
Yeah,
I hope
Yeah,
so.
Stella, please stay strong. Things are looking better than they have a year ago. Keep fighting. Tell Julian when you see him next time that he has an enormous amount of support, that we all love him, that he has to push through and stay strong. I think he will be reunited with him and he will be with his children soon. So let's just not lose hope and